Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to the new Edinburgh Tattoo for 2021.
Hi, folks. No, we're not doing a podcast version of the Edinburgh Tattoo, but our guest today has been closely associated with the tattoo for many, many years. And he was also one of the founder members of the Robert Burns Worldwide Federation Guild of Speakers. So a wide range of topics for today's podcast and today's discussion. As usual, Douglas and Jim here to talk to our guest. Hi, Jim, how are you doing?
Doing great, Douglas. Looking forward to this today.
And our guest today is Alasdair Hutton.
A very good day to you, gentlemen, and to your audience.
Thank you very much. And I take it the weather wherever you are, Alasdair, is the same as it is here in Mauchline, and I imagine in Kilmarnock where Jim is.
It's bonny here. The sun's out, and I'm sure if I opened the window, I could hear the birds singing. So it's just. But fortunately, the temperature has dropped to a temperature we can thole. So, I mean, we're not bred to these high temperatures, but I quite like this. This seems more like what I would like a Scottish summer to be.
So where are you based, Alasdair?
I live in Kelso, down in the bonny borderland. And it's my family originated really from the southeast, and so I'm here really where my family started from.
Very good. Newcomer Burns Club has spent many happy days in Kelso on our regular annual outings.
Good. Oh well, I'm glad, because it's a bonny town in an idyllic setting by the river, and it has a long and distinguished ancient history really to it, so it's got a lot of fascination about it, and I enjoy living here.
Very good. Well, let's get started. You'll know if you've watched some of the podcasts that our first question is always, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
It's not very interesting really, but I was born in London in 1940. My parents both came from Glasgow. My father was managing a tobacco warehouse in London when I was born, but I didn't stay there long because one of Herr Hitler's bombs blew the house apart. And my mother, who was very sensible, had put me in a Moses basket under the stairs, which she rated as the strongest part of the house. And so when the house started to tumble down, all I did was swing backwards and forwards. But of course, they couldn't possibly stay there. So she just bundled up everything she had, including me, and got on an unheated, unlit train. It took 16 hours to get back to Scotland. And that's why I think she was never particularly tolerant of moaning girls who whined about the most ridiculously trivial things, never having had even the remotest idea of what it was like to try and safeguard or bring up an infant in wartime. But she brought me back to Scotland, and she settled down in Gatehouse of Fleet, or outside Gatehouse of Fleet. We were in a little bungalow that was right down on the water's edge at a place called Sand Green, which is part of the Kelly estate. And we could walk straight off the veranda onto the sand, and she used to go out baiting lines in the Solway to catch fresh fish. So we ate well because of her sort of initiative. And then up into the village, we moved up into the village, into the high street, and I did my first year of school at Gatehouse Village School. And my most vivid recollection of that is seeing the girl sitting in front of me, whose name was Isabel Mary Gibson, with two pigtails And eventually I could not resist the temptation of leaning forward and pulling these pigtails, which didn't go down terribly well. But to be fair, I wasn't punished for it. Although I suppose one of the other interesting recollections from Gatehouse of Fleet was that I remember the American armored fighting vehicles driving through Gatehouse on their way to the south coast for the Normandy landings, because they landed in Loch Ryan, where the Americans had a big, well, the British and the Americans had a big deep water naval jetty there. And so all this stuff came ashore and just trundled by the roads down through Scotland and Northern England and away down to the south coast. And my mother got very cross because I had a pedal car called Boanerges, and one of the kindly American soldiers greased this pedal car. It must have been squeaking, I suppose. But the grease, which was for heavy armored fighting vehicles, came off all over my clothes. And my mother was not best pleased to have to try and wash this stuff off afterwards. Anyway, I did my first year of school in Gatehouse, and then my mother had met a lady, actually Isabel Mary Gibson's mother, who told her about Dollar. So my mother, after the war was over, my mother upped sticks and away to Dollar, where the founder of Dollar Academy had left a legacy for children who lived in the town to go to the school subsidized. So we went to Dollar Academy, or later my brother, who was born in Dumfries, and my sister, who was born in the house in Gatehouse, all went to Dollar Academy subsidized. So it gave us a very good start in life. All right, 3 different schools in 3 different years, but that doesn't seem to matter, I don't think. But that was where we started.
Very good. And what about subjects at school? Did you have any favourite subjects?
And I remember being quite interested in performing. I suppose I must have had some interest in English, but particularly in poetry more than anything else. And I also won a prize for collecting wildflowers. And I've still got the books of pressed wildflowers that I collected when I was at Dollar, and the book that I was given as a prize for my collection of wildflowers, because like Gatehouse, Dollar, it's quite small really, and nestling at the foot of the Ochels meant that I could go up into the hills and collect all manner of wildflowers that maybe certainly would not have been available to children in the cities. I mean, you could do it in New Cumnock. You could wander the hills there and do the same thing. But anyway, I collected wildflowers. But my father and mother had separated at the end of the war and divorced. And when my father took ill with leukemia and died when I was 13. And all during the Second World War and after the war, my mother had been receiving food parcels. Now, you're too young to remember, but our cousins in the Commonwealth, in Australia in this case, sent us parcels of food because they knew that Britain was under the cosh. And with these parcels of food had apparently come, I never saw them, but apparently this elderly lady whose husband, or she had originally come from Glasgow and married a man who had originally come from Berwickshire, which was where my forebears came from, had been continually pressing my mother to bring the children out to Australia, where there was masses of space and freedom and sunshine. And, I mean, it was known as the sunburned country and all that kind of thing. And when my father died, my mother just had extraordinary spirit, just sold up everything and went. because you could get to Australia for practically nothing in those days, in £10 poms. So she and I think, paid £10. I'm not sure if my brother paid anything, and my sister certainly went for nothing. And so we all emigrated to Australia, which was wonderful, really, in its in giving you giving me a completely different perspective on the world. You saw the world that you'd come from the other side, and it's like looking through a telescope from the other end, and you got a different vision. And of course, the people were quite different. Now, I don't mean by that the Australians. What I mean is that Australia was full of people who had escaped from Europe, mainly because of either poverty in the southern countries like Greece and Italy, or communism in Central Europe, places like Hungary and Czechoslovakia and Poland. And people had gone zooming out of these countries to get away from the communists and went to Australia. Now, the Australians needed them because they needed to build big infrastructure projects like the Kosciuszko Dam and all that kind of thing. And so they welcomed them in. But when I went to school there, of course, there were kids from all of these countries in my class at school. And so I learned a heck of a lot about the Europe that I had just left that I never got taught at Tuller Academy.
And what age were you when you went to Australia?
I was 14 then.
14.
So I was at a good age, but at a sort of silly age too, because I immediately I landed. This elderly lady with whom we went initially to stay had booked me in to a school, and so I got into a taxi, which delivered me first of all to the Church of England Boys Grammar School. And they said they knew nothing about me and they'd never heard of me. So the taxi driver then took me off to Brisbane State High School, where I was expected. Now, Brisbane State High School was a most unusual school. It was a state school, but it was also classed as one of the great public schools of Queensland, which is, the Australians are very particular. You cut the schools down the middle, as it were, and certain schools are rated as public schools and the rest are not public schools. But State High had this peculiar characteristic of being not just a state school, but also one of the Jeep schools, the great public schools of Queensland. So I was thrust into this school, which now I may say, after I left, is now one of the most sought after schools in the whole of the state of Queensland. It has a tremendous academic record, and it's got nearly 50 Olympians to its credit, dating back to the 1950s. Quite extraordinary achievement, and I can't think of any school in Scotland that has even remotely that sort of thing. I mean, I'm trying to think, well, Kelso High School produced a British Lion. Oh no, it's produced several British Lions, but I'm not sure if it has any Olympians, but I mean, to have that many from a state school was quite remarkable. Although I have to say that while I was at the school, I didn't really do anything particularly distinguished, although without wanting to sound particularly boastful, this past week, they have just made me into a school legend. Now, the idea of these legends is that they pick out past students who've done what they consider to be quite well in life, and they put up posters about them around the school to encourage the next generation to say, more or less, well, if he can do it or she can do it, you can do it. Get on with it. So, of course, I wasn't able to go out to Queensland to receive the honour, but it's just nice to have it anyway.
Very good. And you've received many honours during your life, haven't you? What? Tell us about a couple of them.
Well, not really. I haven't done particularly well, but after I'd finished with State High, I rather foolishly walked out of State High one day. I just got tired of school. And although I was only aged 15, naturally at that age, you think you're the bee's knees. Now, after school, there was a radio station, a commercial radio station in Brisbane, which had a little program called Rumpus Room. And my pal and I used to go from the school into the center of the city. We stopped there before we dispersed to our homes, went to Rumpus Room, and I used to read out the advertisements and introduce the records and so on in Rumpus Room. So I went down to this radio station and asked the manager if I could have a job at the age of 15, stupid boy. The manager's secretary said, well, it's 12:30 and Mr. Carson's just going for lunch. May I suggest you come back at 2:30? So I came back and he gave me a job. So that was the end of that. That was the end of my schooling, which makes the legend thing all the more completely stupid. But it started me off on a career of working. We needed the work, to be honest. I mean, we had no income coming in, and my mother had a few little investments, but you know, it was tough. I have to say, it was tough going, a woman bringing up 3 kids on her own with no income. But we made it. We got there, and then we came back to Britain at the very end of 1961. I was getting very interested in this new European community, as it was known then, and went to work on my return, went to work for the Press and Journal in Aberdeen. And while I was in Aberdeen, I joined the TA. I joined the B company of the parachute battalion of the TA. And the first, you generously call it an honor, the first of the honors was an MBE for the service that I did in 15 para. And I've never really left because although I don't jump anymore or run around the hills like a fool anymore, I'm now the president of the Parachute Regimental Association in Scotland and Northern Ireland, which was great. But then I went to work after the Press and Journal, I got a bit bored with that because I'd worked for a newspaper in Australia, and the P&J was rather smaller. And so I got bored with that, went to Glasgow, just resigned and went to Glasgow, and was months and months out of work, but eventually got a call on the phone one day, and I don't know how and why. To this day, I have no idea why. They rang me up and asked if I'd like to come in and do an audition to be an announcer. And so I thought, hell, I've got no work. To be a BBC announcer would be beyond my wildest dreams. So I hurried down there and got the job. And to this day, I still don't know why. But so that set me off on that. So I did a year at the BBC in Glasgow, then 3 years at the BBC in Northern Ireland, which was a fascinating experience in view of what came later, because I left Northern Ireland 1 month before the first of the Nicra marches, which set off the Troubles. And they went on for another 30 years. And then after, I was getting a bit bored of the BBC after about 15 years or so, and thought, well, I'm really interested in this European community. And they were starting the first elections for the European Parliament in 1979. And I threw my hat in the ring, not expecting, never having represented anything, never having stood for any election, nothing, and was selected to fight for the south of Scotland, which of course included New Cumnock. And to my astonishment and delight, I have to say, was elected. So the next honour came at the end of that. I did 10 years there and got an OBE for that. So those were fun. Those were great fun. And I have to say, that period in the European Parliament was completely fascinating. And although I stood as a conservative then, I've left the party now over the stupid nonsense of Brexit. But the one thing about the south of Scotland was, of course, it covered practically every inch of Burns country. So I had to drive backwards and forwards across this wonderfully scenic, terrific place, including New Cumnock, and really enjoyed the period, because you could actually do positive things to help people. And most of the effort I put in was into South Ayrshire, where there was real deprivation and real hardship in many of the communities there. And I got to know the folk there. I don't know, do you remember a councillor in New Cumnock called Patterson? He was an old miner. He was a terrific bloke. And he and Joe Hodge, who were the leaders of Cumnock and Doon Valley District Council, I got on really well with, although I was a conservative, and probably the only conservative ever to represent New Cumnock. But that was a wonderful experience. And of course, as I got to know Robert Burns, I got to know all of the Burns country pretty well.
We won't get you started talking about Burns yet, because I think we need to get onto the Edinburgh Tattoo. If you tell us how you got involved in that.
Well, that was equally sort of stupid in its way. I spent 10 years in the European Parliament, and that was a most terrific experience. But after 10 years, I got booted out. The constituency that I represented was made up largely of Westminster constituencies which had Labour members. And so the Labour Party, having failed to get the seat twice, was absolutely determined it was going to get it on the third try, and they did. So I was booted out on the street and tried to find some sort of work. I used the European Parliament experience a bit. I did a bit of work for the Royal Bank, for the Isle of Man Parliament, for I think it was the Lanarkshire Development Association and that kind of thing. But being a consultant was not really, it wasn't something that suited me. Then completely out of the blue, I got a call to ask if I would be interested in being auditioned to narrate the Edinburgh Tattoo. Now, I then subsequently discovered how it came about. My brother was the senior designer at the BBC, and he was in a place that the ladies don't normally go to in the BBC. And standing there alongside him was the chap who did the outside broadcast of the Tattoo. And as they chatted, as men do in such places, he asked my brother what I was doing. And Guthrie said, well, not a lot. And so Ian Christie very kindly mentioned my name to Michael Parker, who was taking over as the producer of the Tattoo, who asked me to come up and talk to him. So I went up to Edinburgh Castle, where his office was, and talked to him. And I don't think Michael was that interested in the voice part of the Tattoo. He had a visual vision of the Tattoo. He saw it in spectacular terms, and the narration was pretty second rate to him. And so he said, yeah, all right, okay, yes, you'll do. but largely because I'd done the broadcasting and I was a part-time soldier. So this appealed to him, obviously, because I could speak soldier speak. And I mean, when you've commanded, I eventually, I joined in Aberdeen, but after 3 months I'd gone down to Glasgow and eventually commanded the Glasgow company of the battalion. Well, you can imagine the sort of people that would join a TA parachute battalion in Glasgow. These were rogues and hard men, really, but they were an absolute joy to soldier with. Commanding them was not easy, but it was great fun. So Michael thought that anybody who'd done this could do the tattoo, and he took me on, and I've never left.
So how many years is that you've been associated with the tattoo?
Well, I suppose 30 now.
Wow.
So we haven't done one for the last couple of years, but that was 30 years. Well, it was 31, I suppose, but the 70th anniversary was last year, it was 2020, but sadly we had to bin that tattoo because of the COVID pandemic. But I'm still there. I mean, we started work on a tattoo for this year, but that had to be binned really because of insurance. So I suppose still there 31 years later.
And the roles described as the kind of narrator and writer of the tattoo. So what does that role entail? Do you have to think of the whole script, or how does it work?
Yeah, I write the script top to tail. What normally happens is the producer gathers together a whole string of acts, not necessarily with any direct connection between them. And then I find out who's on the show and what they're doing. And I always try to look for some link, for something that gives a thread to the show. I mean, let me give you an interesting example. There was one year when we did something about the Stone of Scone, and we had a band from Egypt on the tattoo. The band from Egypt was fascinating because they had pipers and they swaggered in a way which not even the boldest pipe band in Scotland would swagger. And my guess is that some Scotsman from somewhere had told them, you've got to swagger, you know. They took it to an extreme, but the producer had said to me, I bet you can't find a connection between the Stone of Scone and the Egyptians. But I did, of course, because there's an old legend that the Stone of Scone was brought out of Egypt by the daughter of a pharaoh called Scota, and taken to Iberia and then to Scotland. So I found the link. But
Well done.
The ancient Egyptians and the Stone of Scone. So I'm looking for threads like that, links that will tie the different acts together to make it look as though the whole thing has been carefully crafted from the beginning, even though it hasn't been.
And do you do a kind of dress rehearsal for the tattoo? And how many rehearsals do you have to do?
We don't do that many rehearsals, funnily enough, but we start normally on a Monday morning at 9:15. The first 15 minutes is given to the producer to do a pep talk to the troops. And we start on the Monday morning, run through the afternoon, and then the evening up at the castle. We can't do anything at the castle during the day because Historic Scotland has visitors to the castle, and it needs visitors to the castle to pay its way. So at night, we rehearse up on the esplanade of the castle. We do the same on Tuesday. And then on the Wednesday, we put on effectively a little semi-rehearsal at Redford Barracks, which at which we invite local residents and disabled people to come and watch. And that gives us the first inkling of how an audience will react to the various acts in the show. And usually we do two of those, and usually to the second one, the Lord Provost of Edinburgh and the General Officer commanding the army in Scotland turn up, and all their various tales of hangers-on turn up with them. Then in the afternoon, we have the afternoon off, and then at night we go up to the castle and do two rehearsals. On Thursday, the day is there for the producer to do any fine tuning he wants, and then two rehearsals at night on the Thursday, the second of which is a half price performance for the public that don't want to pay the full price. And then on the Friday night, we're off and running. So we actually cram it all into a very short space of time, and it works.
Tremendous. And it's been extended to many other places around the world. Are you involved with the narration for these as well?
Yes, I'm happy to say that I have narrated every single performance of the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo and the Edinburgh Military Tattoo before it became royal in Edinburgh and in New Zealand and Australia since 1992. We took it out to New Zealand, to a sort of New Zealand festival in 2000, and then we've been to Australia, I think 3 times, and then back to New Zealand again. So, and I've been lucky enough to narrate and write all of those performances. So I've seen them ebb and flow through the years, and it's been a quite fantastic experience.
Tremendous. Well, I'm sure we could talk about the tattoo and all of these experiences for many, many more minutes in this podcast, but our title is My Life with Robert Burns, so let's chat a little bit about your interest in Burns. You've already mentioned being involved with the Burns Country, but I'll pass over to Jim to get you to talk a bit more about your interest in Burns.
With pleasure.
Alasdair, just simply, how did you come into contact with Burns the first time?
It's quite an interesting question to look back on. From childhood, I was always very interested in Scottish poetry, not necessarily Robert Burns, but just Scottish poetry as such. In fact, when I went to Australia, I walked across to a neighbouring suburb and won a prize for reciting a Scottish poem called Poaching in Excelsis, which is about 2 blokes who went out poaching a rhinoceros in South Africa. But I didn't really come to Robert Burns until 1969. And I was asked by a girl that I'd been in the same class at school as, who was then a sort of, I'm not quite sure how you would describe it, as a sort of procurement manager for Cannisburn Hospital in Glasgow, if I would address the haggis at the Cannisburn Hospital Burns Supper. So I learned up the haggis and recited that, and she asked me back to do it the next year. So it can't have been that bad the first time around. And it just went on from there. People asked me to come and do the haggis again and again. And eventually, I was asked if I would do an immortal memory. Well, that was extremely scary because, of course, I knew nothing about Robert Burns. And what on earth do you say about somebody who's so finely revered? But anyway, that was in Brussels, so it didn't really matter too much. The expats in Brussels were not going to tear me limb from limb. So I did it there, and then it just seemed to go on from there. And the more I read about Robert Burns, the more I found out what an extraordinary individual he was. I mean, he's always presented as being, the simple plumman poet, and of course he was anything but a simple man. And his life as a ploughman was fairly limited. So it was fascinating to discover exactly who he was and what his talents were, and realize exactly how skillful he was at the use of the language, both English and Scots. And so I owe it all to this old classmate of mine to get me started. And like the parachute regiment, I've never really stopped.
Douglas said in the introduction that you were a member of the Robert Burns Guild of Speakers. And I'm really interested as to how you got inveigled with them, because the Silver Fox, a good friend of mine, Len Murray, was the dean for many years. And I'm just wondering how you get involved and got into that.
Well, the Guild of Speakers was started by a chap called Murdo Morrison, who runs the Allenton Jolly Beggars Club. And Murdo and I had known each other in Glasgow as youths. And somehow or another, I mean, we hit it off. I mean, it seems sort of odd, really, a boy from Lewis down in Glasgow, and me, or now he lives in Wishaw, but he was living in Glasgow then, and me from all over the place. But we hit it off. We found a mutual friendship, and we never lost touch. Now, Murdo was, I think it would be fair to say, fed up with the low quality of some of the speaking that goes on at Burns suppers, people who don't really put much effort into their work and just come along and they gob off and then leave, as though in some mysterious way they've satisfied the audience, but they haven't. And so Murdo wanted to raise the whole tone and content of Burns speaking. And for some reason, which he's never satisfactorily explained to me, he thought that I would be able to help in this. The membership's limited to 37, being the number of years that Robert Burns lived. And for some reason, he asked me to be one of them. And I was honored to do it.
Yeah, I was approached by Murdo myself, and it is quite I understand what you're talking about when you get the request. But I mean, I don't know, have you any real strong, enjoyable memories of speaking at Burns suppers?
I've enjoyed most of them, but I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, I got invited to one through Murdo's. Came out from his Exxon days when he was in public relations, I think it was, in Exxon, and he ran a Burns supper in Fife, and I went up to that, and I really enjoyed that one. I suppose the most one that stands out in my mind was, but it exemplified to me the kind of spuriousness of some people who profess to be Burns lovers. I won't say the town in which this took place, but I was delivering the immortal memory, and I started with that hoary old joke about Robert Burns' mother, Agnes Brune, having had a dalliance with an Ebenezer fish before she met his father. And so I said I'd speculated as to what sort of a supper we would be sitting down to tonight if she had married Mr. Fish instead of Mr. Burns. And of course, you know, I mean, it's just a stupid joke, really. But at the end of that bloody supper, this chap came up to me and he said, do you know, he said, I've been studying Burns for years and I didn't know that. And I really hadn't got the heart to tell him it was nothing but a silly joke. That one stands out in my
mind. Is there anything in the Burns life, his works, that you particularly identify with?
Yes. The one thing that puzzles me enormously is that his military connection has been almost completely airbrushed out of people's knowledge of Robert Burns. Every time I speak about Burns, the volunteer soldier, and of course I was a volunteer soldier for 35 years, and I still am to a degree. So I identified with Burns as a Dumfries volunteer. But every time I speak about it, people come up afterwards and they say, I never knew that. I'd never heard of that. And I'm thinking to myself, why not? It's not secret. The military, I mean, he's the only poet that I know of who was given a military funeral, a big military funeral. I've never understood why that's not better known. So I identify completely with that part of his life. And maybe you can explain to me why nobody seems to ken why he was a volunteer soldier, but it seems to be airbrushed out.
I don't think it's airbrushed out. I just think it's the works take over. And again, my next question to you would be, do you have a favourite piece of his work at all?
Well, I suppose it would be consistent to say that Dumfries Volunteers, as that seems to me to encapsulate the extraordinary, I don't know, the breadth of Burns. Burns, it seems to me that you can go into Robert Burns like you can go into the Bible and find any passage that suits what you want to prove. He was a big man in the sense of being, he understood pretty well everything that there is to understand about human nature, and he wrote about it from all angles. I mean, he as a young man, he embraced the folly of revolution in America and in France in particular. And then when he realized what the Jacobins in France were really like, he flipped right the other way around and became a very staunch and declared monarchist in the Dumfries Volunteers, for example. But it seems to me that he was, the Dumfries Volunteers encapsulates that, because I mean, the last two lines, now how does it go? Something like, but as we sing God Save the King, we'll never forget the people. He's got both on both hands. He's basically saying, you know, yes, right, we need a good lead, we need a good head of state, but the head of state needs a lot of loyal people with him, and we can't forget them if we want the thing to be complete, society to be complete. So I think he just is a much bigger figure than most people make out.
There's what to go invasion threat that let the loons beware, sir. The first lines as well are a good starter to any Burns poem.
And if you try to put it to the music, Pass About the Joram, that he wrote it for, it's really a pretty jaunty piece of work. It's quite extraordinary, really. And you think it was, I mean, when it was written, it was more popular even than Scots Whahey. And you could see that if you try and put the words to pass about the Joram, it's very jaunty, and you could see why people would be jigging along to it.
Just one more question before I let Douglas come back in again. What's your current position in terms of your involvement with Burns?
Or just now and again, when people ask me to do a burn supper, I will happily do it for them. I've got an invitation in already to go to Luxembourg next year. So no, if someone wants me to do one and I'm not already booked, I'm happy to do whatever they want for it. A wee poem. I can't remember verses terribly well. It goes in there and comes out there. But I'm happy to do that, or the Lasses, or Immortal Man, whatever anybody wants,
Well, I think from that you're liable to get a list of invitations coming fairly soon, because people will be trying to get their supper sorted out for the next year, having been resigned to doing them virtually for the past year.
Well, if I can help, I will. But please bear in mind, I'm really not a Burns expert, and it's just fun, and you meet some marvelous people at Burns suppers. Some really interesting people.
Taking it as away from Burns for a short time, you've done a little bit of writing yourself. Mainly from what I've read, it's been some children's books. Can you tell us a little bit about these?
Well, in the bookcase behind me, I've got the things that I wrote when I was about 9 or 10 years old. I've always done little bits of writing, but never dreamed that I'd be good enough to ever be published. But the producer of the tattoo, Brigadier David Alfrey, one day we were having a cup of tea, and he said he'd seen this fox up on the stands when he was sitting contemplating his first tattoo. And this fox, apparently, he'd heard this scratching, and he looked along, and there was a fox sitting there looking at him, and he looked at the fox. Neither of them spoke, and the fox got fed up with his silence and shrugged its shoulders and walked off. And then David Alfrey said, I'm sure we could make a story out of that. And without thinking, stupidly, I piped up and said, oh, I could write you that. And that was both a bad mistake and a good chance. I tried. He said, yeah, okay, go ahead. So I tried to write this, and for 3 months struggled and couldn't get anywhere. And I was just on the point of saying, I'll have to let you down, David. I can't do it. I just can't. I thought I could, but I can't. And then I thought, the motto of my regiment, the parachute regiment, is Utrinque paratus, which means ready for anything. So I thought, paras never give up. So I sat down one day, and in 4 days I had the book written. It just, it was just like that. And then it went down quite well. They hired a really good artist who worked for the DC Thompson Press and did the cartoons for the Beano and the Dandy and things like that. And so you'll see touches of the Beano in their little drawings, but some of them are really fine. And then they said that they liked that, so they wanted another one. So I wrote a second one called The Tattoo Fox Makes, the first one's called The Tattoo Fox. The second one's called The Tattoo Fox Makes New Friends. I wrote another one, but the editor didn't like it, so I never bothered to try and publish it. Then I wrote a book about the tattoo after the first 25 years. that just pulled together my experiences of the history of tattoos, the Edinburgh Tattoo, and all the other tattoos I've done around the world, in Australia, New Zealand, and America, and etc. I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, I did one in the Netherlands as well. And then
what's that book called?
That's called The Greatest Show on Earth. And I think the tattoo really is the greatest show on earth. It pulls together people from all parts of the globe, both on the esplanade and in the audience. Then the editor asked me if I'd do a book of Scott's nursery rhymes, but only nursery rhymes that were out of copyright. So I had to delve deep to find the old nursery rhymes from years and years ago, and I did that. But then I ran into a difficulty there because Scots children don't speak Scots in the way that I used to when I was a child at school in Gatehouse. And so I had to tone it down a bit and cut out some of the more Scottish of the nursery rhymes. But that's that. And then I did, and then I in 2015, I promised a group of dog owners called Dandy Dinmans that I would write a little story about their dog because it was a vulnerable species. So eventually I got around to writing this little book called Mustard and Pepper, which were basically the names of the Dandy Dinmans that Sir Walter Scott used in Guy Mannering, his second novel. And Sir Walter Scott himself owned quite a lot of Dandy Dinman dogs, as well as many others. And so those are the ones I've written so far. I've got 2 on the stocks about to be published. One's a kind of biography of Sir Walter Scott for children and people who haven't read Sir Walter Scott before. And the other one is about the castle cat. In the Tattoo Fox, the fox is befriended by a cat that lives in Edinburgh Castle. And one of the publishers said she would like to have a book about the cat. And could I make the cat female? So I said I could do the book about the cat, but certainly not make it female because the fox was female and the cat was male in the book. And he couldn't suddenly be a trans cat. So I would just make him a male cat. So both of those are due to be published, I don't know, within a month or so. So you might see them, I hope.
Very good. And you've obviously got a particular interest in Sir Walter Scott, and that at one stage were you chairman of the Edinburgh Club?
Yes, chairman of the Edinburgh Sir Walter Scott Club, and I'm now on the committee of the Friends of Abbotsford. Because Sir Walter Scott was Sir Walter Scott and Robert Burns are much in common. Scott met Burns when he was just a boy, when Scott was a boy and Burns was at the height of his fame and lionizing. And he described the extraordinary light of intelligence that he could see in Robert Burns' eyes as they sort of glowed when he got passionate about something. And Burns had been out and about as an exciseman, riding hither and yon across the country and hearing people reciting old verses and old songs and so on and so forth. Burns was not a musician and he couldn't sing, but he could scrape a violin a bit. And he came back and wrote down these scraps of verse, and Auld Lang Syne was one of them, which he then embellished. Where there were gaps missing, he would use his poetic talent to brush them up. And Walter Scott did the same. He would go about the borderland collecting the old border ballads. Now, the people of their parents' generation, James Hogg's mother, for example, she upbraided Scott and said, you know, you've robbed them of their music now you've written them down. They'll never be sung more. And I think I'm right in saying that Robert Burns' mother probably took much the same view, that writing down what came from the oral tradition was a bad mistake. But I disagree from this perspective. If Scott and Burns had not written these pieces down, we wouldn't have any trace of them at all today, I believe. And I mean, Scott did the same with the fragments of border ballads. He embellished them and then wrote his own. So the two writers had a great deal in common.
I agree entirely. And I think we've got a lot to thank Burns for, and obviously Scott, in the fact that they did write these things down, because we get so much enjoyment from these songs.
Aye, absolutely. And I mean, both of them had the ear, both of them had the poetic ear, the rhythm of words that allowed them to get the rhythm of the poems and ballads and songs that they collected and just mesh into those. So it wasn't, they weren't McGonagall-like writing gibberish, and they weren't like, I mean, I'm at one with the great border poet Will Ogilvie, who upbraided modern poetry as just prose cut into short lines. I don't like lines that neither scan nor rhyme. I like it. I like poems. I like lines to rhyme and to have a rhythm to them. And both Burns and Scott could hear the rhythm in words. In Scott's case, a lot of the rhythm came from horse riding, less so in Burns, but Scott wrote a lot of things to the rhythm of a horse moving. Burns, I think, had a more romantic and poetic ear and was able to make out of, in many cases, a sow's ear. I mean, John Anderson, My Joe, was a perfect example. I mean, that was a real sow's ear of a bawdy song that Burns created into the most beautiful love song in the end, particularly for people at our end of the age spectrum.
Jim, we're running out of time for this podcast. Is there anything else we want to ask Alasdair before we finish?
Just one very simple question. Have you any Burns ambitions left at all, Alasdair?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I've written Immortal Memories, which cover his soldiering, his understanding of the Scottish character, his relations with the church, his collecting of songs. I've steered clear of his relations with the ladies, but I can't think of. I think I've probably exhausted my ability to probe Robert Burns, and I'm happy to pass that on to a future generation if they're ever interested. But let me think now. No, I can't even think of anything that I have a burning ambition to do.
Well, you fulfilled whatever the burning ambition was to talk to us about your life with Robert Burns. So thank you very much for that, Alasdair.
Well, it's a great honour to be asked back to New Cumnock, which, as I say, I had the joy of representing for 10 years in the European Parliament, and so to be back to do something with Robert Burns. Of course, the Dumfries Volunteers virtually references New Cumnock in, was it the Nith shall run to Corsingon? Well, you can see Corsingon from New Cumnock. So,
yeah,
so it's an honour to be asked back.
Thank you very much.
From scenes like these, old Scotia's grandeur springs, that makes her loved at home, revered abroad. Oh, Scotia, my dear, my native soil, be blessed with health and peace and sweet content.